How's it going, Rip City? Welcome back to the Blazer Fanatics podcast, episode 3, first podcast of the new year. I'm your host, Duvy, with my co host, Boozy. We hope everyone has had a good start to 2021. Hope everybody is staying safe out there. How are you doing, Boozy?
Not too bad, not too bad. Just glad to get back in the win column for fantasy this week. We got top of the league, so always happy after a disappointing first week to bounce back.
Went from bottom of the scoring to top of the scoring in 1 week. Congratulations! I got my second dub, starting out 2-0, so we're feeling good right now. So first, let's talk about this Blazers road trip. The Blazers went down to California, played a couple games, 4 games this week. First off, got a nice win against the defending champions, Los Angeles Lakers. The Blazers won that game. Don't have it in front of me, sorry. 115 to 107. How do you feel about that win against the defending champs?
Definitely a great win. That was one game that I wasn't expecting us to pull out at the end, just with how LeBron and AD always plays well above what they usually do against us, and it was good to see that Derek Jones and Rocco. That's what we got him for, to play defense on key players on the other team. And I mean, having AD not have his best performance, limited to pretty much single digits for most of the game due to Robert Covington's just length and just being there. It was definitely a great performance outside of LeBron's hot start. That was something to watch.
Yeah, the team really fought back after that beginning, what was it, 15-0 run by the Lakers early on.
So, and that
Um,
was mostly just LeBron pulling up. I mean, he was feeling himself, and I was just like, this is going to be another one of those Utah game where we're just going to get down early and just keep getting down on ourselves and just coast to another loss. But no, we bounced back really quickly. I think a lot of that also had to do with Gary Trent coming off the bench. It was nice to see him play aggressive.
yeah, Gary Trent was huge. He finished game 28 points, 10 of 14 from the field, 7 of 11 from the 3-point line. He was really doing everything. I mean, step backs, mid range pull ups, catch and shoots. The Lakers just really didn't have an answer for him. They were really trying to hone in on Damon CJ, and then we threw Gary Trent into that lineup at the small forward position a lot of the times, or at the 2 next to CJ off the bench unit, and he really just cooked the whole team.
I mean, yeah, when after LeBron's little craziness off the beginning, that when Trent came in to the end of that first early second, that's really where most of his points came in, scoring almost 20 points in that first half. It really ignited our offense and then allowed Rocco and Jones Jr. to just they both had poor shooting nights, but what they did on the offense or on the defensive end really made up for it. I mean, Rocco and Jones Jr. shot 0 of 11 from three, and we still shoot and score 115 points. Like, that's just absurd. We don't usually get that kind of production out of our wing players like that.
Yeah, the value of Jones Jr. and Covington goes a lot deeper than the box scores. They do everything that you don't see on a stat sheet. CJ McCollum shot he struggled 7 to 22 from the field, but honestly overall didn't really felt like he hurt the team or held us back at all. Damian Lillard had 31 on 10 of 16 shooting, but it was a kind of a quiet performance from him. There's never really a time where he took over the game. He was quiet, but he finished the game with 31.
And that's crazy to think that you could just be quiet on a 30-point night. That's just the great player and Dame that we have. Just to be able to, I mean, shooting 10 of 16 too. It just felt like he made a shot when we needed it. He didn't go out of his way to go and score, and that really made the difference in that game.
I agree completely. And Enes Kanter continuing to dominate off the bench on the offensive end, 12 points, 14 boards on 6 and 9 shooting. He has been clinical for Portland. That Lakers game, in my opinion, was a huge win for Portland against the defending champs in Staples, regardless, no crowd, but still. That was a gritty win. The team had to really pull it through at the end, and I feel like they showed a lot of heart, a lot of fight. And Jones Jr. and Covington, like you already mentioned, against LeBron down the stretch and AD, huge. I mean, holding AD to a very quiet double double, poor shooting. I mean, that was massive for the team's momentum going down the stretch.
And this was after a game where kids and it really brought a lot of. I was very skeptical about how this performance was going to go, especially seeing LeBron get off hot. That it was going to be another James Harden type night for him, and just to be able to see that we bounced back and didn't allow 120 points that game and really stopped them. And it definitely shows that we have the ability to be a good defensive team if we put our minds to it. And hopefully these kind of performances carry out throughout the rest of the season, especially after the week that we had against the Clippers and everything.
Yeah, I mean, in today's NBA, a 115-107 scoreline is kind of a low scoring game. So, and especially with our defense. So, to see them giving up only 107 to LeBron and AD and the gang, really good outing. Two nights later, back in Staples, facing off against the Los Angeles Clippers, where the Blazers fall 128 to 105. How did you feel about this game?
We just couldn't have an answer. I mean, Kawhi just got in his groove, and PG was just finding his rhythm too. And it doesn't help that they shot almost 50% from three, and it was closer to 60% when they were actually hit before the half. And it's just hard to bounce back when you're trading buckets and they're hitting threes every possession, and you're either missing or scoring a two, which we definitely did not shoot the ball well either, only shooting 42%, which that's kind of how those games go, where one team's hot and the other team just can't buy a bucket. That's for Portland fell in that one.
Yeah, there's not really a whole lot you can do when you are cold and the other team is shooting lights out from the perimeter. Paul George, 23 on 8 of 15 with 10 boards, Kawhi with 28. Um, when both of those guys are in their rhythm, in their groove, not a whole lot you can do, even when you have guys like Covington and Jones Jr. trying to stop them. Uh, Honestly, not a whole lot to talk about from that Clippers game. We just were flat footed. Our defense kind of reverted back to some of the earlier games this year where we just looked slow, tired, couldn't really get out, not closing out on shooters very well. And even when we did, they were just firing on all cylinders. Carmelo Anthony had 15 off the bench. He had a good game. Um, let's talk about Harry
Yeah,
Giles in the Clippers game really
yeah.
fast.
I was gonna bring him up. It's just like in these kind of games where it just doesn't it doesn't matter if he scores or he doesn't. Just him being out there makes our offense faster, our defense faster. It just rejuvenates us and makes it feel like we just started the game fresh. And that's kind of the thing that we need. Even if he just comes in for 2 to 3 minutes, he makes an instant impact. And it's always worth a risk to take. If I mean, we were down pretty big most of the game, and just to throw him in there 2, 3, 4 minutes to maybe get a little run going, 10-2, whatever, and that puts us in the game for most of it. But it's just we couldn't. Dame had a poor shooting night, 3 of 14, couldn't make a three. And when you have a night like that, it's hard to recover without some type of energy boost. And we just weren't getting that.
Yeah, that was a rare night from Dame, not hitting a single three all night. Um, he's kind of been that way this season. I'm not trying to say he's had a bad season, but he hasn't really had a game where he's taken over yet, where he's just said, "We're gonna win, and we're gonna win because of me." And it's not what we're used to seeing, especially coming off of that bubble. Um, so I feel like the Blazers just need to find their offensive groove a little more. They need to get Dame a little more involved, I think, via ball movement instead of more isolations because they're not falling at them. But back to Harry Giles real quick. I mean, he only played 8 minutes, and he shot 3 of 4, 7 points and 5 rebounds. He's like an espresso shot off the bench. He's instant energy. And when you have a weak defensive bench unit with Carmelo and Cantor, and Hood's not the greatest defender in there. When you have that poor defensive unit, you need a guy like Giles who's just going to give you energy and lift up the whole team, in my opinion.
especially on a game where Trent wasn't available to play, and he usually is that guy off the bench to give us a boost offensively and defensively. And it definitely helps to have another one when one of them isn't able to play. It would have just been good to just see him out there and see if he could have made a difference, which obviously Simons, Hood, Cantor, and Mello off our bench just wasn't cutting it against that team. And seeing Giles perform, obviously in garbage time, but just to put up 7 and 5 in 8 minutes, that's and be a +6, that's really good.
I feel like if Terry Stotts played him more often, we would see that from him. I feel like he has the ability to do that against non-garbage time, guys. And I'm not really understanding the whole personnel choices there.
And
Moving
this goes
on.
into
Oh,
that third game
yeah.
against the Warriors. That's where we saw Giles go in that non-garbage time,
Yes.
and you just saw instant hustle. I mean,
Yes.
you that one move where he jumped on the floor and then threw it back with his left arm, like that shouldn't even be physically possible. But he just made it and flicked it right up to one of our players, and it just plays like that or what we expect from him. And that's what I hope we start seeing more and more of. But what were your thoughts on the Warriors game, that first one?
I feel like this is the most complete team game from the Blazers this season. Um, Obviously, it's easy to just look at the score, see that we blew out Golden State, and say that. But I mean, we had both of our guys go off. Dame and CJ both shot 11 of 21, 34 and 28 respectively. Carmelo 5 of 9, 18 off the bench. He played awesome. Um, no Gary Trent in this game still, but I feel like we were flying on the defensive end. Um, but Derek Jones, 5 steals. I mean, what more can you really ask from one of your role players? But
And this is
this
just
is
one thing. Like their starters just couldn't get in a groove with
no
Rocco and Derek Jones playing well defensively.
right.
They really didn't get into their groove until Pascal just went off against our bench because Cantor just wasn't quick enough to move with them, and that's why it was good to see Giles in there. And I mean, holding Steph to 4 of 12 shooting from three is not the easiest thing to do. But Jones picked him up full court, didn't give him a breath of air, and it was good to see a great performance again defensively out of them.
Yeah, and I had pointed this out on our Twitter account. You can follow us at Fanatics Blazer on Twitter. Um, Covington and Jones with 11 rebounds and 8 rebounds. That's another reason why they've been such huge additions to the team this year. They help in the rebounding department. They take a lot of pressure off Nurk, who still isn't looking like his old self before the leg injury. Um, so that was just really great to see how they're able to take pressure off of our big guys, especially when they play, a lot of minutes, 36 for Covington and 33 for Jones. Um, the Warriors, aside from Wiseman, aren't the tallest team in the league, but for them to have that type of rebounding performance as our wings was huge.
Yeah, especially with Nurkic having foul trouble, that having ending with 5 and really didn't play until very late in the fourth, if or very early in the fourth. But it was just something that having the length and Rocco having the experience of playing the 5 with Houston for most of last year, it's not something that's foreign to him. He can definitely jump in, be the fifth, in the lineup down the stretch. If we want to have somebody like Trent or Mello, replace Nurkic or something in that closing minutes. And it's just good to see the versatility that we have with our wing players now that they can pretty much guard anything 1 through 5 and do it at a high rate, which is just something that we didn't have last year. with Bazemore, or when we traded for Ariza, or years past with Harkless and Aminu. It's just a different type of defense that we can play, and different types of lineups that we can have the small ball lineup and still be productive on the rebounds and everything else.
Yeah, I agree. And another poor shooting night for them, but I mean that doesn't really matter. Their playmaking, I think, was underrated in that game too. Covington only had 2 assists and Jones Jr. only had 3 assists, but those passes that they made were all, in my opinion, very timely. They came at the right opportunities to cutting guys along the baseline. Um, and so it's just a matter of not necessarily how many plays that they made, but they made the right play at the right points in the game where we needed them.
I mean, look, and they only had one turnover, which obviously means that they weren't risking anything. They just made it. They made the right play, and it worked out. And it's always good to see that they're not having two or three or four turnovers, just trying to risk. Those are more meant for Dame and CJ, kind of to make those more risky passes. But it's even Dame and CJ only combined for one turnover too, so that's always a good thing to see.
Yeah, and that ball movement, that sweet, sweet ball movement in that game was the
Yeah.
best I've seen this season. There was one play that everyone was tweeting on about where the ball movement just went around the perimeter. Boom. CJ pump fake, passed off, another pass, Dame wide open on the wing for the three. It was just a complete team effort. They shot lights out from three, just as the Clippers did against us, shooting 46.5%. Um, Out rebounded the Warriors by 9. Uh, Assists beat them in the category 23-19. Had 11 total steals. Big part of that was Jones. And we had less turnovers, 10 turnovers to their 15. So it was just all around just an incredible performance from the Blazers against the Warriors in that first game. Not really the story of the second game, though, which just wrapped up not too long ago tonight. What about this one, Boozy? What did you see?
I mean, it's not something to it's not the refs' entire fault for this game, for Portland not being able to come back. They definitely made runs late, and the Warriors made clutch shots to keep their lead. It just it was just the type of calls that Portland, I think, just didn't adjust to it. With Derek Jones just getting called for some more ticky tack fouls that usually are not called, and it just kind of defensively allowed Steph to just get hot, and it was just one of those games where you just couldn't stop them. I mean, it's the same thing when Dame's hot. They're on another level, especially at that superstar stage where if they see the ball go in once, they're they're not missing. So it's tough to see, but there's definitely a lot of positives we can take out from this game. What are some that you saw?
Um, I'm not usually a ref hater. I don't blame the refs for everything wrong that goes on in a basketball game, but with those ticky tack fouls, it really took Portland out of the rhythm early on in the game. They weren't able to get into any sort of, defensive rhythm, any sort of aggression that the Blazers were trying to have on defense just got shut down immediately from the refs. And it threw everybody off their game. Um, Jones picking up 5 fouls killed the Blazers because Covington and Jones play a very physical type of defense where they try to beat you to spots. They try to force you to make a mistake. They swipe at the ball, and as great as that is most of the time, when you get an officiating crew like you had tonight, where they're gonna call the ticky tack fouls, the little the little calls that you normally wouldn't care about. That's something that can kill the Blazers, and we definitely saw that tonight early on.
Yeah, and it was just kind of something that it helped that Trent was available for tonight, and he didn't have the best shooting tonight, going 3 of 11, 1 of 6 from three. But once he went in, he definitely stopped Steph to an extent. I mean, he didn't give him the easy looks that he was getting in the first half, and it was just Steph kind of went off screens easy, with the bigs not really until very late jumping up and taking that away from him. But it's the big another big story is just the assists. We just
Hmm.
were not passing the ball very much. It was kind of we went down, and usually once we get down, we try to ISO ball it for the win. And it's just one of those nights where Dame and CJ just weren't. They got streaky, but they just couldn't sustain it for long enough to have our defense not get the timely stops they needed to even make those runs worth it late. And it Wiggins and Oubre definitely stepped up for them shooting wise, both shooting 50% or above. That definitely helps when if Steph didn't have his 60-point night to have those other guys kind of step up. But it's tough when this whole team's got it going and our defense just didn't have the right ability to not foul.
Yeah, considering the way that Wiggins and Oubre have played this year, for them to have a good performance for the Warriors tonight was big for them. And, of course it would happen against Portland, right? When don't we let, guys get hot for just no reason? Uh Steph Curry, there's really not much you can do about him. I mean, we obviously had a lot of defensive faults tonight where we're dropping bigs on screens. We're just not showing a whole lot of effort trying to guard him, running around the court. Uh, in career high 62 points. What can you really do?
Yeah, I mean the biggest storyline from us was definitely Cantor's performance. He was just a menace on the offensive rebounds. Like there's nothing more to it. I mean, he got more offensive rebounds than defensive rebounds, going from eight offensive and four defensive. Like that's you don't see that when you see a guy who gets 12 rebounds. You're like, okay, maybe one or two offensive rebounds, not eight. That's just it was definitely helpful when we didn't have the best shooting night that he was there to grab those boards and especially to play as well as he did after Nurkic not having the best of games today. And his performance on the bench has just been very consistent. And that's just something we need to keep going forward. Just got to get more consistent players outside of him on our bench.
I mean, here's what I say about Ennis. You can't deny that offensively he's a monster. I mean, but I personally see four defensive rebounds as a bad thing. I mean, when you go 24 and 12 and you finish with a -4 plus minus, how bad do you have to be on the defensive end? And he really got cooked
Yeah,
by Pascal and Wiseman.
that was one thing that it would have been good to see Giles come in and replace Cantor or have both of them play together because Pascal was just cooking us again. It's just he's got that mid range and that shot that you have to respect as a big. And when Cantor and Nurkic just aren't the quickest guys laterally, it's they have to sag back in the paint, and that just gives Pascal easy shots. I mean, shooting 5 of 6 tonight for 10 points. It's never it's never easy to come back when their bench is shooting lights out as well.
What really irritates me watching the game is that, I mean, of course, Wiggins and Oubre had good games tonight, but you really only have one person to stop on the entire court, and you let him score 62 on you still.
Yeah,
I mean, when Stotts' rotation down the stretch in that fourth quarter, when we were kind of flirting with a comeback, within 12 to 9 points ish, and you're running a lineup of Dame, CJ, Gary, Mello, and Cantor. How do you expect to get a defensive stop to come back? You're not gonna outshoot a Stephen Curry team, especially when he's cooking you at that point for 50 plus already. Why not throw a guy like Giles in there? Take Cantor out, even though he's having a great offensive game, or I don't know, take Trent out. He didn't play very well. I mean, defensively he was okay, I guess, tonight. But why not go bigger, grab some boards, try to get some stops? Terry's rotations made zero sense to me tonight. And I mean, Robert Covington played garbage minutes. Terry brought him back in with like a minute 30 left when the game was sealed. So,
And that was just because Melo fouled out.
yeah,
You probably wouldn't have brought Covington back in.
yeah. I mean, for Derek Jones to only play 17 minutes this game was really disappointing to see. And Jones, I mean, foul trouble, obviously, but in my opinion, down the stretch in that fourth quarter with like 6 minutes left, you play your starters until they're fouled out. You play maybe not Dame or CJ if they get in a really bad foul trouble, you sit them for a minute or two. But Covington and Jones need to play down the stretch in the fourth quarters until they can't play anymore. Because those guys are defensive stoppers. They have more energy than typically the rest of the entire other team, and when you lose that spark and you have an old Mellow, a lazy defensive Cantor, and Gary who's not playing very well coming off of the injury, I mean, you're just it seems like you don't care. You know? It seems like
Yeah,
where's the effort? What are you thinking? What's going through your head?
because that's the whole thing with. I mean, Curry wasn't, just driving, pulling up from, 30 feet out. I mean, he did that a few times, but it was mostly just coming off that pick and roll. And I mean, when you see Cantor and Melo defending that screen, you're like, oh boy, it's gonna be an easy three. Like Curry knew that, and pretty much everyone watching knew what was going to happen when Curry was coming off a screen. And with Trent on the ball, that's all he could do: force him into the screen and just hope for the best that he's got help on the other side. But it's just we just kept going with the same look and just hoping a different result happened, and it just doesn't work. And it's unfortunate that this is the way the road trip ended with how great we played the first game against LA. But it just seems like we can't string together a couple good games in a row, which hopefully soon we can, because we got the team and we have the defensive pieces that have shown that they're good enough to, play with the best of them. And then we have nights like this where you don't know. You like we could have pulled it out, but it's just so tough watching games like this where Portland can play better, but you just see that they're not. It just doesn't look like they care, like you said.
It's just so frustrating with how diverse the lineups that we could be using are. Um, we have we have so many capable players. We can do so many different things, but even when we do win, it just night in and night out, we're just seeing the same things over and over. And, it was discovered that Terry Stotts brought Jim Boylan in to help with the defense as a defensive consultant in the offseason. And yeah, it really looks like that because we suck. And Jim Boylan was a terrible head coach in Chicago. Um, let's move into the Fire Stotts crowd on Twitter. They were in full force tonight. The hashtag Fire Stotts, they're trying to get it trending on Twitter after the game. How do you feel about the Fire Stotts crowd?
It's tough. It's because there's given points where he's a great coach, and there's given points where he's not. And it just kind of seems like with the assets that we have right now, we should not have been put into that place today or in some of these games. And it all comes down to what Dame thinks. I think Dame knows what's best for our team. He's shown that, and I mean, he wants to win this year. He's very out there with saying that let's win this, let's go after it. So if Dame wants Stotts to get fired, then I think that would be the move. It's just I feel like Stotts down the stretch just needs to be better and just trust his guys, because this kind of seemed like a thing where Nurkic wasn't having the best of games, that he just kind of let him out. And as it goes the same with Jones Jr., it's just you got to trust that those people will be your starters. They're your starters for a reason, and we brought those guys in for a reason, and we've retained the talent we have. And I think he's just got to say, all right, we're gonna, you know, 6 minutes left in the fourth, we're down 10 starters. Let's win this for us. Just kind of like that. Even if because they also did this against the Lakers with Trent going off, so it's obviously not a thing where if bench players go off, they finish the game. that it just kind of seemed like the starters were just having a terrible game that he's just like, let's change it up, and it just didn't pay off.
This felt like a game that you're supposed to get ejected from, in my
Yeah,
opinion. You know, as a head coach, trying to rally your guys, this definitely felt like a game you just say, screw it. I'm just, I'm just gonna get angry, try to fire at my guys. And he just didn't really have any sort of passion to him. I didn't really see any fire to try and get this team going in the fourth quarter or really at any point in the game. And so and Terry Stotts isn't always even a level-headed guy either. He's gotten hot before. He's gotten ejected before. This felt like a game where he needed to get ejected to show that he cared, to show the fans that he cared, and he didn't. I mean, I completely understand where the Fire Stotts crowd is coming from. We're seeing the same things we've seen for 3 years defensively with this team. We came into the game, I think, 25th in defensive rating. That's going to drop after letting Steph score 62. And I get it. I understand. And I'm not completely against it. I think it's too early in this season to do it. I think if they were going to, you had to do it last off season. But how long have we heard from Stotts apologists that, oh, it's a personnel issue. We just don't have the defensive pieces. It's we don't have the guys we need to get defensive stops yet. Well, here they are. Covington, Jones Jr., Trent. Here you go. And we're still bottom 5 in the league in defensive ratings through the first 6 games. And I don't really see that changing.
yeah, and it's definitely just one thing where if our offense was there, obviously we could have won a couple more of these games. But just to see that adding two pieces to our starting lineup that are supposed to be defensive minded and to still allow close to 120 points per game against, I mean, obviously this is a tough stretch playing Houston, playing the Warriors twice, playing the Jazz, and both Lakers team. I mean, they're all great teams. And it's obviously it's going to go down as, more games are played against lesser opponents, but you never know because I mean, we let a Kings team during the preseason go off against us as well. So it just seems like either they're just not clicking on defense or they just cannot adjust to teams quick enough. Because we played very well against the Lakers, we played very well against the Warriors that first game defensively, and it just seems like he tries to change it instead of just keeping the system the same. Because if you have Derek Jones is a fantastic on-ball defender. I mean, Dame said it. He's one of the hardest players to go up against. And when you have that kind of guy going up against their best player in most cases, I mean, you just let him do what he can do. And if nights like this where he gets in foul trouble, you have guys like Trent coming off the bench to replace him. So it's not a personnel issue. We have the players to do it. We have more than enough players to make our team a at least top 15 defensive team, if not top 10. I mean, looking at other teams too, we definitely have better personnel than most of them, and they're well above us defensively.
I have never seen a basketball team look so different every time they step on the court. I
Yeah.
mean, and that's not a personnel issue. That's a coaching, that's a staff issue. And I don't know. It's like he makes adjustments, but at the same time, it feels like he doesn't make adjustments. Talking about Stotts, he, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what to think. Like I said, I understand where the Fire Stotts crowd is coming from. I'm not completely against the idea. I just think you can't do it yet. I think I think around the trade deadline, if we're not top 5 in the West, or if we're not in the playoff picture around the trade deadline or All Star break this season, that we could be having a different conversation about Terry Stotts' time in Portland at the moment.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
if you look at some of these teams that have a better, defensive rating than us, I mean, there are countless teams on the Eastern Conference who are two at least that have one win in the Raptors and the Pistons. I mean, the Pistons have a better defensive rating than us, and they have they have nobody on that team who actually can guard the ball. I mean, they go into shoot-offs against other teams and somehow still allow less points than us, which is just absurd to me that we have the personnel and other teams are still outperforming us. Like the Hornets, they're only allowing 111 points per game, and we're up to probably after tonight well over 120. That's a 10-point swing compared for a team that's not even supposed to be good defensively, and they're all scores. That's all they have there, and it's it's absurd that our defensive system cannot be better than what it is right now.
At what point do you think Neil Olshey looks at Stotts, looks at the team he's given Stotts, and goes, "Dude, what the hell? Where do you think that breaking point is between upper management and our coaching staff?"
I think you obviously got to give them a little bit of benefit of doubt with having two new starters. I mean, it takes a little bit of time to get them gelled into a rotation, but I think it just comes down to if we continue to be outside the top 20, and when you don't see improvement, that was the whole thing with that. We've seen steady improvement between games. Even if the outcomes are well off and different, you'll see an improvement, but it kind of feels like with the second Warriors game, we took a huge step back. And if I think if you don't see much improvement defensively come, like you said, All-Star break, trade deadline, stuff like that, there could be a reason to get rid of him, to bring in a more defensive minded coach, and that's kind of what we need. I mean, we have CJ and Dame who are still putting up, I mean, over 50 points per game combined, which puts them at one of the top in the league backcourts. And scoring is not our issue. Even when, our team's not shooting well, we still put up over 120 points. And we need to get our system down to get those much needed stops. It's tough with a shorter preseason, shorter, you know, practices and everything, but it's starting to kind of go back into years previous where it's like we expect something, we should get something different, but the result just stays the same.
Yeah, the trajectory of this team is very hard to determine when you look different every time you walk out of the locker room. So it'll be interesting to see where we go from here. Moving into this week's games, we have um, two games at home to start off the week. Bulls on Tuesday and Timberwolves on Thursday, and then Saturday the Blazers travel down to Sacramento to take on the Kings. How are we looking for this week? What do you want to see from the team? What do you think our record could be after this week?
I think it's definitely good to get out of the LA trip and come back home for a 2 game stretch. I think we definitely need to go 3-0 this week. Have some big win, not just win, actually have comfortable wins like we did that first Warriors game. We need it. Portland needs it, and the confidence of the team definitely needs it. So I hope we can have 3 convincing wins.
Yeah, the Bulls have not looked good this year. I mean, the last few games they've looked a lot better than the first few. They're 3-4, but the Blazers, that should be a game where we should blow that team out. If we're real contenders in this West, if we're a top 5 seed in the West this year, that's a team you blow out. Um, Minnesota on Thursday, they're not gonna have Cat, right?
I believe he's still out. Yeah, so
So
that's one of their biggest players,
that should be a win there too. They're 2-4 in the season as of now.
and
Um,
their 4 losses have been back to back to back to back blowouts. It's not they've
right.
not been close losses either. They've been bad losses. So that's another one where it's a team that's on the down low, and we just gotta just come out and perform well.
And lastly, against the Kings, obviously a much better opponent than the Bulls and the Timberwolves. They're playing, you know, above expectations in my opinion through the first 6 games. They're sitting at 3-3, the same as us. That's gonna be a tough game in Sacramento, but again, I feel like that's a game that we should pull out given how the teams look on paper personnel wise.
Yeah, I mean they have some pretty big wins, two against the Nuggets, one against the Suns, and they obviously just lost two straight against the Rockets, which we did beat. But they've beat some teams that we going into the season you definitely would not have thought to that they're 2-0 against the Nuggets. I mean, another team that Portland struggled against in the preseason. So it'll be good to see if we can come back from our preseason woes against and get another win in the column. But that's going to be the biggest game of the week, and it's crazy to say that it's against the Sacramento Kings. That that's going to be our toughest opponent. So let's hope. Let's hope for the best. That's all we can do at this point. Being a Blazer fan, we got the heartbeats going, the anxiety watching these games. It's just the whole picture.
I think we can both agree that the Blazers should go 3-0 this week, but we'll be happy with 2-1, right?
Anything in the win column for a
We'll
Portland fan would be
we'll be
good to see. Or
happy
just
if we yeah, we'll be happy if we don't get skunked and go 0-3 this week.
and let's hope that defensively we can see some improvements. Offensively, we can see some more ball movement, not trying to do as much ISO ball, and that's that's what we hope for. And these are the three games that are much needed to get our confidence back against lesser opponents again and make up for these six harder games that we started the season off against.
Yeah, the Blazers are definitely moving now into an easier stretch. We have to start gaining a little momentum going forward, and I think this first week it could really kick that off. This team needs to show a lot more fight than they did against the Warriors tonight. I think that is going to wrap up this week's edition of the Blazer Fanatics podcast. We hope your 2021 keeps kicking off to a good start. We hope you guys stay safe. New episodes every Monday, 10 a.m. Pacific time. You can follow us on Blazers at Fanatics Blazer. We thank you guys for tuning in. Have a great rest of the week. We'll see you next Monday.